In the last video, we learned how to name pitches. In this video, we will be examining the distance between any combination of pitches. This is what we call an interval. Intervals are the building blocks of scales, chords, and melodies. They're super important. In order to determine the correct interval, you need to apply two steps. For step 1, we will only look at the natural notes and start counting from 1. At this point, we ignore all accidentals. The interval between any A and any other A is what we call a unison. We use number 1 for the unison. The interval between any A and any B, this could be A to B flat, A flat to B natural, and any other combination, is what we call a second, and we use number 2. A third is what we call the distance between any A and any C. Any A to any D we refer to as a fourth, using number 4. Any A to any E is called a fifth. You guessed right, we use number 5. Any A to any F is a sixth, using number 6. And any A to any G is called a seventh, using number 7. After the seventh, we end up at A again, and this is called an octave. The octave has the same function as the root. For step 2, we look at the interval quality and measure the distance more precisely. So first of all, the unison, the octave, the fourth, and the fifth are perfect intervals. The second, third, sixth, and seventh are either minor or major, but never perfect. Let's look at the distance between A and B flat. In step 1, we determined that the distance from any A to any B is called a second. In step 2, we find out that between A and B flat is only a half step distance. Therefore, we call this interval a minor second. If we look at the interval between A and B natural, the distance increases to 2 half steps, and therefore the interval is called a major second. Let's look at the distance between A and C. Step 1 determines this is any kind of third interval. In step 2, we will figure out that the distance equals 3 half steps, and this is what we call a minor third. A to C sharp, however, are 4 half steps apart, and we call this a major third. The distance from A to D equals 5 half steps, and this is called a perfect fourth. Jumping from A to E, well, the distance equals 7 half steps, and this is what we call a perfect fifth. A and F are 8 half steps apart, and we call this minor 6, a minor 6 interval. Raising the F by a half step, we now created a 9 half step distance, and this is our major 6. Between A and G, there's a 10 half step gap, and this is called a minor 7th. Last but not least, raising the G to G sharp, we increased the distance to 11 half steps and call this a major 7th interval. 12 half steps would lead us back to our root note an octave higher. You might have noticed that we skipped the intervals at around 6 half steps. If you raise a perfect interval by a half step, you end up with an augmented interval. For example, raising the perfect fourth, in this case D, to D sharp. You could also lower a perfect interval by a half step. This is what you call a diminished interval. For example, lowering the E to E flat. Both pitches, the augmented fourth and the diminished fifth are 6 half steps apart from the root note and are enharmonical equivalents. Another synonym for this interval is called the tritone. The list we created here for the note A features the most common intervals. You could do the same for any of the other pitches too. For example, determining the distance from C to E flat. This would be a minor third interval. If you want to learn more about intervals and go really deep into the material, featuring way more exercises and examples, you can check out my in-depth theory course, and you can find the link in the description box. We are going to use intervals for everything that's about to follow within this video course. Intervals are really super important, and I can't stress that enough. However, right now I want to give you some practical concepts on how you can implement intervals into your own playing. For example, you could start by identifying the root note on the fretboard. Let's take the note A, for example. So the first step is identifying all of the notes A. Next up, you could take whatever interval, let's take the minor second, and you try to visualize the minor second. Again, this is not a tutorial about visualization. However, you can use the knowledge from this video in order to do so. This would be the minor second. And so on and so forth. You could take, for example, the major third starting from A. Or let's say a minor seventh. Or the tritone. And so on and so forth. Within the next lessons, we're going to use intervals in order to build scales and chords and melodies and literally everything else that music theory has to offer. Get your intervals down, and I'll see you in the next video.